The thing I wanted to go on to was the Democrats' disavowal of the rule of law. The rule of law is a fascist concept now, I presume, because they're just openly calling for blood. And you might think I'm being a bit uncharitable with all of that. I don't think I am, and let's go through it. So where we left off yesterday was the closing witnesses from the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin trial, in which the response was uncivilized to say the least. So the first thing here being that one of the witnesses who was on the side of the defense, activists went to his former house and decided to throw a pig's head on it and throw pig's blood all over this house. A house he's not even in because it's his former house. So perfectly civilized, rational response from people who want justice and not just mob rule. But okay, that's just activists. But then there was Maxine Waters, a congresswoman, who came out and said some pretty horrible things by saying that she was asked, what should we do? And she was like, you need to stay on the streets. We need to be more confrontational with people. We need to get a guilty verdict for homicide, first-degree homicide, which he's not charged with, so they can't get that. And if we don't get that, we should stay on the streets, be more confrontational, more combative, that sort of thing. And this...
nothing new for Maxine Waters here, by the way.
That's the thing. It's not new for her. She's done this multiple times. So if we can get the next one up, this is her back in the day, CNN reporting here, so it's not like it's the Fox News or anything. Maxine Waters encouraged supporters to harass Trump administration officials. Because she was saying if you see someone from the Trump administration, form a crowd, make sure they know.
Face.
Yeah, make sure they know they're not welcome here. Like if they're in a diner or just getting gas or anything.
I mean, it's got shades of cultural revolution, frankly.
Yeah, she's not interested in a democratic society in which there's the opposition and we debate about things and so on and so forth. And when you're out of politics, you're with your family, that's fine.
Yeah.
No.
She doesn't believe in civil society.
Civil society is the enemy to her.
Yeah.
And she also did this, apparently, a long time ago during the Rodney King riots as well. George Posobiec digging this up, in which she was asked about the violence. And you would think, as a politician back then, you would at least say, okay, no, the violence is bad, and we shouldn't engage in that. And she couldn't. She was just like, no, I understand why they're violent. Sorry, I understand why they're angry. And that's the case. And it's like, right, you couldn't just bring yourself to say, no, don't do any violence. That's
So she's
horrible.
been doing this shtick for literally decades.
Yeah. She says in there, I don't want to see violence, but don't
who
do
does?
the violence. And it's like, yeah, I know what that is. That's a dog whistle. That's you. I don't want to say the thing.
Yeah.
So that's not new for her. And this is what led after her speech that we saw some other acts of violence take place, exactly as anyone would expect. So the National Guard being shot at in a drive-by shooting, which is perfectly normal things for a normal country that's experiencing normality. You have to bring in the National Guard and they're getting shot at by the populace.
But what happened? Well, it was a drive-by. Oh, God.
Yeah, just a drive-by on the National Guard, of all things. And it's not that they're there because of just people want to attack them or the police station. Apparently, they're trying to attack all emergency services that are trying to help people in Minneapolis. So if you can get the next one, this is the National Guard pointing out that they have to have their their soldiers at every emergency service to protect them from people attacking them. I mean, the fire service here, with the National Guard protecting them. The police, of course. And then...
The police require the National Guard's protection.
Yeah, and then ambulances requiring the protection of the National Guard. I mean, sort of the kind of stuff you would expect from, I don't know, Iraq or something like that.
Yeah.
No, Minneapolis.
An occupied war zone requires this kind of military presence. Paris requires this kind of military presence.
Belgium.
Apparently now, Belgium. Apparently now Minneapolis.
God, freedom is retreating. So the court case, this obviously had an effect on, which is the defense were pointing out, well, the jury weren't yet sequestered at the time of all this. They haven't been sequestered throughout some of the other rioting that's been taking place in response to different cases. And then, well, this looks like enough for them to argue that we should get a mistrial on this, because how are these jurors not going to be affected by it? Sure, you've told them not to look at the news, but the Floyd stuff and the left-wing paradigm on this isn't just in the news, it's within popular culture. I mean, you can't get away from it.
Yeah.
I mean, Nelson even points out, I didn't have it in here, in which he watched two fiction shows, and in both of those shows, they get references to this case. And he's like, look, you can't just say don't watch the news and that's enough. Like, we've got to do something about this.
Yeah.
And I have sympathy with him. I don't know the law about what is a mistrial, but let's just play the clip for his argument here.
Specifically referencing that an elected official, United States congressperson, was making what I interpreted to be, and what I think are reasonably interpreted to be, threats against the sanctity of the jury process, threatening and intimidating a jury, demanding that if there's not a guilty verdict, that there would be further further problems, Your Honor, and given the fact that this jury has not been sequestered, it has been my position all along throughout the course of this case that this jury should have been sequestered at the outset. The jury has not been continually told to stay away from media, only media about this case. There is a high probability that members of this jury have seen these comments, are familiar with these comments, and things that have happened throughout the course of this trial.
And he's right. I don't know how on earth these people would not be aware that if they come to the conclusion that he's not guilty, that there will be riots outside and around the state in which they live.
Yeah.
I mean, he even points out in there that one of the jurors lives in the city where, what was it, Duante White, the fellow who was shot, and there were riots. He lives in that city, the city where all the rioting took place in response to that, during the time that he's a juror for this trial.
Yeah.
It's like, well, he's not, I think, unreasonable to point this out. But the state had a position in response, and I'm just going to play the judge's comments that Maxine Waters has given him grounds for appeal and the state's position. Let's play.
Well, I'll give you that Congresswoman Waters may have given you something on appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned, but what's the state's position?
I don't know that this particular representative made a specified threat of violence. I don't know what the context of the statement is.
So we just don't know what it is. They went on to say you'd have to give us this, in specifics and writing. It's like, okay, but whatever. He doesn't grant the motion for appeal, for mistrial, but he did have some pretty damning things to say about people like Maxine Waters, who are just openly trying to stoke violence. Let's play.
I'm aware of the media reports. I'm aware that Congresswoman Waters was talking specifically about this trial and about the unacceptability of anything less than a murder conviction, and talk about being confrontational, but you can submit the press articles about that. This goes back to what I've been saying from the beginning. I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch and our function. I think if they want to give their opinions, they should do so in a respectful and in a manner that is consistent with their oath to the Constitution, to respect the co-equal branch of government. Their failure to do so, I think, is abhorrent, but I don't think it has prejudiced us with additional material that would prejudice this jury. They have been told not to watch the news. I trust they are following those instructions, and that there is not in any way a prejudice to the defendant beyond the articles that we're talking specifically about the facts of this case. A congresswoman's opinion really doesn't matter a whole lot. Anyway, so motion for mistrial is denied.
You can see Nelson smirking there in response to her opinion doesn't matter much.
I agree, but she is causing trouble.
Like, it doesn't matter a whole much to the nation at large, but it doesn't matter enough to those people on the ground who are going to be committing those acts of violence in response to any outcome. They can find him guilty on all three of the charges, the two manslaughter ones and the unintentional homicide. It still won't be enough for them. They're not interested in the case. They're not interested in the outcome.
Well, I mean, she's literally defined it that if we don't get something he's not being charged with, then this will not be good enough. And if he's not being charged with it, he can't possibly be convicted of it. And so we know in advance that it won't be good enough.
Which is why he points out that he wants elected officials to stop talking in this way, being disrespectful to the rule of law, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
She's just saying the rule of law doesn't matter. Just, I think he should be charged with this thing, convicted on this thing that he's not being charged with because it'd be impossible to prove.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't get that, we should just, she's saying in a very unveiled way, we should just burn it all down.
Yeah, but I mean,
Great.
Maxine Waters is openly hostile to the concept of civil society, which is embedded in the concept of the rule of law.
And you would think, in response to that, you'd just be like, get her out. Like, I don't care what
You would
political
think
party
so,
you're in.
yeah.
You'd be like, just no, that is beyond the pale. And we do have some of this in the UK to a good extent. So I mean, you do see it on occasion. I mean, it's rough, but it does happen that the Conservatives and the Labour Party throw these people out because they don't want anything to do with them. I mean, people like Claudia Webb, for example, being thrown out. There's also just people who break the law that get thrown out.
Claudia Webb got thrown out, did she?
Yeah, she's not a Labour Party MP. She got thrown out by Keir Starmer. But
Based.
this thing does happen on occasion. But in American politics, it doesn't seem to happen at all. It's really weird. So the only option left is for the other side to try and censor her. So this is Breitbart reporting that...
Censure, not
sorry,
censor.
Censure. They're trying to get rid of her position. She has a chairmanship on some committee or another, which is a way of, harming her. So she was also asked about that speech from the judge, telling her she should shut her mouth, and she didn't shut her mouth, because of course she wouldn't. So she said she was surprised at the fact that the judge said, "My words don't matter." And then Waters stood by the use of the word confrontational, saying the whole civil rights movement was confrontational. So what? Like,
this isn't the same thing?
This isn't the same thing. Like, we have the footage from last year in which they were burning down the whole city.
Yeah, but you're not suggesting that anyone is being... Well, you are suggesting this, but this is not about that. This is about whether Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd. This is not about changing law to prevent black people from being able to vote or whatever. Or, it's not about any of that.
But it's also just disingenuous in the sense of, like, she's trying to phrase it as, I'm just calling for peaceful protest. No, you aren't.
Oh,
So
no, absolutely
don't
not.
lie to us. So the GOP House leader has responded by saying, I'm introducing a resolution to censure Representative Waters for these dangerous comments, and I hope that all my colleagues, both Republican and Democrat, will stand up for peace on American streets. Perfectly responsible thing to do. I mean, he just looks in the right. And the Democrat House leader, Nancy Pelosi, has done the perfectly... No, she didn't. No, she didn't. Do anything
Of
else.
course you did.
No. Let's get the next one up. So she stands by. She stands by her denunciation of the rule of law. Because, I mean, you would. Wouldn't you?
Dangerous lunatic.
So she's asked, should she apologize? And she responds with absolutely not to CNN. So CNN asked her. And
This is exactly emblematic of the entire problem with left-wing politics at the moment. They do not agree that there should be a civil society with the right wing. And so every time a Democrat does something wrong, they have to side with the Democrat, even if the Democrat did something demonstrably wrong, that they themselves, in a neutral setting, would condemn. If this was like a Democratic Party conference or something, and Maxine Waters was like, harass, the other faction of the Democrats. They'd be like, no, you can't do that. We need peace, but they don't extend
like
that.
you should have some standards.
Exactly.
Which you say, if you go over this line, I mean, what is it for the Democrats?
Well, they will extend it to one another, but they won't extend it to the Republicans.
But I mean, what is the standard they have of a Democrat can say this and then we will kick you out? I mean, if calling for violence on the streets and saying the rule of law is evil isn't good enough.
I'm sure that if it was like the Democratic Conference or something, then this would be... Maxine Waters would be reprimanded for doing damage to the party and all this sort of stuff. But they don't view the Republicans as like the loyal opposition. They view them as the enemy. And that's how they're treating them. And
Sure,
that's
but
why.
she did say this in public. This is one of her girls, and she's just standing by her, saying that you
Yeah.
should absolutely not apologize. She also
us,
said,
us.
Maxine talked about confrontation in the manner of the civil rights movement was also her defense, and it's just like that's not a defense because that's BS. Everyone knows that's BS, and I don't know how she has the amount of influence to stand there and say a fundamental principle, an Anglo-Saxon political tradition of the rule of law is evil and still stay around in polite society.
I mean, she's not wrong that it's an Anglo-Saxon political tradition, but it's
And
also...
I'm bringing that up.
Yeah, but I mean, that is true, and that is probably how they'll end up pathologizing it. They'll say, the English invented this,
The
therefore
white
it's
supremacy
bad.
thing.
Yeah, that's
So
what they're saying.
it's also embarrassing because, of course, she wasn't smacked down for this, that everyone else has jumped on the bandwagon who feels like it. So the mayor of Minneapolis responded by also trying to stoke up tensions. So you can see here he gave a speech. Regardless of the decision made by the jury, there is one true reality, which is that George Floyd was killed at the hands of the police.
That's an unbelievably irresponsible thing to say. And it's very interesting. I watched the clip. He sounds and looks very much like Justin Trudeau, that kind of false coached left-wing politician that you see. And I'm sure there are right-wing ones that are very similar, but you don't see them so often. But, I mean, look at his mannerisms. Just look at... They're overly accentuated. He's obviously putting it on. But then say that there's only one true reality, and that is that George Floyd was killed at the hands of the police. Then what you're saying is the judicial branch is wrong for having skepticism as to whether that is the outcome.
Well, the whole function of it is wrong.
Yeah, the whole function of it.
It should not be a place in which you are innocent until proven guilty,
Yeah.
and we go through all the evidence and make a...
What's the
decision.
point of it?
No, it should be a Soviet-style position in which it's just, if you violated the party, the judge will rule that you violated the party's
Yeah,
rules.
but that's the point. Like, what's the point of the judicial system if you can just a priori assume that someone is wrong because you define them as being wrong, and therefore, why do we have these courts in the first place?
That is the position of this mayor by saying this. I mean,
Yeah.
regardless of the decision made by the jury. I mean, the people who have sat there
It's amazing.
for 15-odd days looking at the evidence on both sides, and they've been sequestered
Yeah.
now, and they're going to debate with each other about what they think is the case, and then come to a reasoned decision.
The jury
now,
of-
screw all of that. There's one true reality, mashallah, in which I have seen the footage, and that's it. I've not listened to any of the evidence, but I've made my decision.
But it really does undermine the sort of, I guess we'll call it the Anglo-Saxon legal framework of your country, which is trial by, the judgment of your peers, right? So it's not one particular point of authority where the God Emperor, the King, the absolute king has the executive authority to be the sole person who makes that decision. Because you're right, what would be the point in having courts in that time and place? What would be the point of that? Instead, the whole point is that, look, you're being judged on a lower level by a jury of your peers, people who are just regular people, who are not like have a directed vested interest in making sure that one outcome or the other outcome comes out. It's people who are like, well, my vested interest is in having that fair trial. And he's totally flying in the face of this. This is probably, I mean, this is worse than anything Maxine Waters said.
Yeah.
Like that's.
But you might think, okay, it's one congresswoman who's being stupid, and then this mayor who went out and said this after she was defended by the House.
This
Democrat
mayor
leader.
who's promoting tyranny in kangaroo courts.
Yeah, okay, it's a few Democrat politicians. No, there are more, because of course there are. So another congresswoman from Pennsylvania tweeted something out. So if we can get the next one up. So this is her response saying, I am praying for justice for George Floyd, his family and loved ones. This nation needs healing. Accountability is a vital part of the process. And you might think this sounds a bit blasé, but the fact she's saying accountability is part of the vital process, she's assuming there that guilty is the only version of accountability.
I assume so. I mean, a charitable reading would say that any form of justice is justice. So, whether he's convicted or not, that's the just outcome, because the process is what dictates what the just outcome is.
That is an interpretation. But Bernie Sanders went a little bit further, because of course Bernie Sanders had to come in here. Justice for George Floyd, Adam Toledo, Daunte Wright, and too many before them must include a national transformation that brings accountability for all officers who murder, including firings, criminal and civil penalties. I mean, just assuming that Chauvin here is a murderer.
Yeah.
Great. I mean, the judge here literally telling you, hey, elected officials, Democrats, shut up. Like, you are interfering with this trial, and it's leading to the defense being able to call for a mistrial. And they're like, nah, push harder.
You're literally going to get Chauvin off the hook, regardless of what the actual evidence suggests.
So,
which is even worse. I mean, like, how stupid are you people?
But that's okay for them. I mean, because if Chauvin, if they do manage to get this prejudiced, and we find out that the jury was able to listen to some biased comments or something, and the whole thing has to be thrown out, this would be a win for them, because they can say, haha, look, the system is broken, even though we're the ones that broke it.
Exactly. These are the people who are going to tear the United States apart. And can we just highlight Comrade Haimb just below, at Big Stinky Boy on Twitter, who, look at that profile picture. I mean, unbelievable stereotype. I just can't believe this. The first comment, we need to abolish the police and look after our own communities. Like, you have a community. Like, oh my God. Sorry. Anyway, I just love a stereotype.
I mean, this is definitely also the whole thing. It's like these people who care about the rule of law are coming from the hashtag defund the police types.
Yeah.
So the next thing I want to show is just the outside the courthouse in which the jury are presumably having their discussions. There are huge crowds of BLM types screaming Chauvin guilty, which I'm sure they can't hear.
Oh, I wonder where they got that idea from. Would it be the media that's been misrepresenting the trial as it's been going along? Would it be the politicians? Would it be, where the activists? Like,
this is the
listen.
thing. There's no call for reason. There's no call for just be reasonable. Like, consider the evidence. It's just hard.
I'm following Sean King's posts all over social media, and it's just, I mean, like, he may as well be calling for them to be put against the wall and shot. He is just so radical.
Why wouldn't he do it?
Exactly. It to me looks like open incitement to violence, and yet he is just there with his millions of followers of accounts, massively well shared posts going, yep, this is it, this is basically going to be the boog from his point of view. And it's like, okay, well, that's just all left up, is it? That's just all fine.
And this is something to keep in mind. Like, when you just get the images from last year's riots just to demonstrate,
Oh yeah,
this is what we're expecting. So after whatever decision is made, this is what you can look forward to in that city.
get
Mob
out
rule.
of Minneapolis.
I mean, just burning stuff down, because perfectly reasonable. So what are the shall we say, trusted name in news has to say about this, in which they're totally moderate. CNN's response here. The far right is using the circumstances of the Chauvin trial as a proxy to describe a so-called attack on law and order.
That's
says
true, Chris Cuomo. That's only because it's happening.
I love it as well, because they literally just accuse you of everything that they believe. I mean, the idea that the far right is using the trial as a proxy to attack law and order. I mean, that is literally the left's position any given day.
No. they're using the trial as a proxy to describe a so-called, I mean, look at all the caveats here, right? It's deliberately done to confuse you. So they're using the trial as a proxy, so that's, the trial's there, so the proxy is something next to it, to describe a so-called, so that's another proxy that we've gone to, attack on law and order. It's like, okay, if I just say yes to all of that, then it collapses back down to you are attacking law and order. So yes, Chris, yes, that's exactly true. You are attacking law and order. These people are attacking law and order. You're defending their attack on law and order. And you're trying to stigmatize those people who are saying, well, maybe we should have some law and order, as if they're not accurately describing something that's happening in reality, which they are.
I mean, how else would he describe the folks who are like, defund the police, you know, Maxine Waters saying, F
Or we
the
could
rule
use
of law.
exactly that.
But what would they
They're
be
using
except attacking law and order?
But we could say it in the same way. Well, the Black Lives Matter, the far left are using the circumstances of the death of George Floyd as a proxy to describe a so-called attack on black people. You could frame it in exactly the same way. But again, they would just say yes, and the whole thing collapses back down to, you are doing this. If you enjoyed this segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can watch the full broadcast live every weekday at 1 p.m. UK time on lotuseaters.com.